Subclass 2.4, liability policy. So the definition of liability policy. A liability policy is a contract in terms of which a person, in return for a premium, undertakes to provide policy benefits if an event contemplated in the contract as a risk relating to the incurring of a liability otherwise than as part of a policy relating to a risk more specifically contemplated in another definition in this section occurs and includes a reinsurance policy in respect of such a policy. So, as I said before, remember when you look at the definitions, it's a contract in terms of which a person or insurer, in return for a premium, undertakes to provide policy benefits if an event occurs. If an event occurs, and it is about contemplated in the contract as a risk relating to the incurring of a liability, otherwise than as part of a policy relating to a risk more specifically contemplated in another definition in this section. Sorry for my lines, people, I'm not the best artist in the world. So once again, there's a contract, there's information risk specified which is contemplated in the contract or in other definitions in this section we're going to discuss. They provide, they undertake to provide benefits in exchange for a premium which you pay. All right. So definitions of liable and liability, there's a difference. According to the Collins English Dictionary, the definition of liable and liability are as follows. Liable, legally obliged or responsible, answerable, also susceptible or exposed. Liability, the state of being liable, also a financial obligation. That's the difference between liable and liability. So liable, you are responsible for, you're answerable to. Liabilities, you are being liable. The state of being liable, you see, financial obligations, you must put your money where your mouth is. Liability in legal terms. In legal terms, the word liability refers to fault. The person who is at fault is liable to another because of his or her actions or failure to act. One example is in the case of a crime. The liability of the offending party may include providing restitution for damage to property or paying medical bills in the case of a physical injury. Another example of a liability in the legal realm is an automobile accident. The person who caused the accident through an action or omission is liable to the injured party. And therefore, you get on your short-term insurance, you get third-party insurance as well. In accounting terms, liability describes an obligation. It refers to money owed to complete a transaction, debt that has yet to be paid, or products or services that have been paid for but have not yet been rendered. There are two general classifications to sum up these types of liability: long-term and short-term. So long-term describes debt paid out over more than 1 year, while short-term liability refers to debt paid within a year or less. Okay. Civil liability. Civil law means the law of a state relating to private and civilian affairs. If one has civil liability, one is therefore liable in terms of civil law, and if found guilty, normally will be ordered to pay compensation. Criminal liability. Criminal law means a body of law dealing with the constitution of offences and the punishment of offenders. If one has criminal liability, one is therefore liable in terms of criminal law, and if found guilty, will face punishment. For example, fines, imprisonment, and a whole host of other punishments. A delict. A delict is an act or omission which in a wrongful and culpable way causes loss to another, responsibility towards society at large. This is where potential losses are most difficult to estimate. An organization can suffer loss even without legal liability being established. So in other words, cost of investigation and documenting in the defense, legal fees, yeah, and out of court settlements, where it is considered more cost effective to settle with the claimant than risk everything on the outcome of an expensive court action. Activity compliance. As the term implies, activity compliance is when an organization actively changes or implements measures to ensure compliance with the relevant legislation. Non-activity compliance. Non-activity compliance can be one of the following. It can be the company chooses not to take any steps to comply with a specific piece or section of legislation. The company does not know about the legislation with which it is required to be compliant. Personal liability insurance. Personal liability insurance, sometimes referred to as a personal legal liability, and is designed to counteract personal liability claims made against the insured by a third party. It will also compensate for accidental physical loss or damage to a third party's property. Cover can be for medical costs, present and future, restoring or replacing damaged property, pain and suffering of the injured party, loss of income, legal costs and expenses, employer's liability, public liability, and professional liability. The personal liability limit of indemnity. Insurers refer to a limit of indemnity. In other words, there's a limit. That word says it. There's a limit to the indemnity, rather than a sum insured in the personal liability policy space. This limit is stated in the policy schedule and standard cover. Your standard cover is quoted for limits between 2 Rand and 5 million Rand. And the insurer will pay for the specified costs up to this limit. So please know the limits for standard cover is 2 Rand, between 2 Rand and 5 million Rand. Okay, that's standard cover. Then we look at the extended personal liability. So this word extended, it means you want more. So extended personal liability cover is available for an extra premium. So because you want to extend it, you pay extra and can increase the sum insured from 10 Rand up to 20 million Rand. So now the difference, the standard, I'll just make a note here for you. As we said before, the standard cover is from 2 Rand to 5 million. And this extended, make a note there for you somewhere. Extended is from 10 Rand up to 20 million Rand. But it comes with an extra premium. Extra premium. All right. Remember it that way. And the policy wording will also specify how the sum insured is applied to multiple losses, though it is a general practice that the sum insured applies per event. Employer's liability. This type of insurance provides cover for liability whether arising under statute or common law, for death or injury or employees arising out of an accident in the course of employment. In South Africa, this is governed by the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act, or otherwise referred to as COID. So we get COID from the first letters of the following words. Compensation, there's your C, uh, there's your O, there's the I, and there's the D. And that makes the acronym COID. Public liability. These policies protect an insured against the consequences of, most commonly, their liability in neglect. Damages may be awarded by a court together with costs for death, bodily injury, or property damage of persons other than employees. The general practice is to issue policies with specific limits of cover. Product liability. This form of cover developed out of public liability and now forms a specialist class in its own right. It addresses injury or damage caused by some object manufactured by the insured. If the manufactured item has to be replaced due to a defect, product guarantee insurance may meet the cost of replacement, and this cover is difficult to find. Yes, so cover for defect items is not very easy to find. Professional indemnity. Professional indemnity, or errors and omissions, E's and O's insurance, provides cover in respect of an act, an error or omission in relating professional services given which causes loss or damage. Professionals such as doctors, architects, attorneys, and insurance brokers can make mistakes, which will render them legally liable to their clients for damages. Have you ever read in the newspapers and magazines about the patient complaint and tell their stories that after they woken up from an operation, there was the doctor forgot their scissors in their stomach. You see, or the doctor operated on the wrong arm or wrong leg. Now that's a professional, um, how can I say, error. Which they didn't do it on purpose. They forgot about it or they made a mistake. The same with attorneys, architects, accountants, and then you suffer. So therefore, they must have professional indemnity to cover them for that. Application of reinsurance to liability risks. All classes of liability insurance suffer from the disadvantage that compared to property or pecuniary insurances, claims take much longer on average to settle. Plaintiffs or their representatives are reluctant to agree compensation until injuries are stabilized. Legal processes in their various stages sometimes take years to reach a conclusion. And these factors result in this business being known as long tail. In countries where employers' liability or similar legislation applies, an insurer faces occasional large individual claims resulting from serious permanent disability of an employee. Another consideration is the accumulation risk, where a major accident could generate claims from a number of different individuals. Further industrial illness arising from the industrial environment in which people work could similarly cause accumulation of loss problems. All these features need to be considered because in the UK, at least policies are issued with unlimited sums insured. Quota share is a proportional technique to address employees' liability, but the problem of unlimited liability calls for an excess of loss solution. Exposures can be reduced to reasonable limits by reinsurance on any one accident basis, either separately for the proportion retained by the insurer or for common account of the original insurer and the quota share reinsurers together. The catastrophe exposures identified above clearly need event protection, and as policies provide unlimited indemnity, the catastrophic program will need to be arranged on a basis which reflects this cover. As public liability covers normally contains limits of indemnity, reinsurance of these accounts will also contain specific limits. These may relate to any overall loss or separately for bodily injury per person, per event, or property damage. In the proportional sector, public liability can be protected by quota share or surplus treaty. Reinsurers would obtain a proportion of the premium in ratio to the percentage of risk insured. Excess of loss reinsurance could apply on either a risk, an event basis, or both. The calculation of appropriate reinsurance premiums for these protections is much more difficult. Products liability and professional indemnity insurances also contain limits of indemnity, normally in the annual aggregate. That means aggregate means combination of smaller amounts. Consequently, the reinsurance approach will be like that for public liability. There are technical considerations applying to these covers to cope with the practical difficulties which arise. Finally, a liability insurer will often have need of facultative reinsurance on individual risks. These may be so large as to exceed treaty limits or are types of risks expressly excluded from the insurance treaties. So personal liabilities, excesses and exclusions. So here we must look at what do they see as an excess or an exclusion. And this is the following. It is common for personal liability insurance to exclude members of the family from cover unless specified. So if you take out insurance, they exclude everybody in your family except when you specify, I want my wife to be the driver as well, or to be insured or whatever. In addition, some insurers require that the members of the family will be living with the insured in order for cover to apply. The exclusion of family has resulted in many complaints following insurer repudiations and services to reinforce how important it is for policyholders to familiarize themselves with the terms and conditions in their insurance contract or policy wording. And that is why it's very important to know, to read, to learn, and to know what is your policy wording, because it can differ from another policy. And every time you take a policy, make sure you read the policy wordings and that you're happy and that you fully understand what they mean. Because if you claim later on and they tell you and they show you, you can say, oh, but I misunderstood it. Oh, I missed that. Sorry, then it's too late. Okay, employees other than domestic employees acting in the course of their employment with the insured are also excluded from cover. So employees other than domestic employees are also excluded from cover. Please note that the cover on a personal liability policy is only available if the insured is found legally liable to pay compensation to the third party. All right, if it's not legally found liable to pay compensation, then it will not pay out. Legal cost and expenses insurance. Insurers also offer cover for legal costs and expenses incurred via a separate section on the personal lines policy schedule. This policy will perform in the event The insured has to initiate a legal defense following criminal, civil, or labor court actions, as well as family matters such as divorce or child custody battles. Tenant liability insurance. This insurance is a nice to have for insureds that are renting property from a landlord. It covers the tenant who becomes legally liable for damage to the property and outbuildings, accidental damage to fixed sanitary ware or fixed glass, and accidental damage to water, gas, sewage, electrical, or telephone connections. So if you're a tenant and you damage that property and outbuildings, like making holes in the walls, uh, or break the glass because your son played cricket outside and he hit a good six straight through two of the house windows of the house, or they break the gas pipes or sewage or electrical wiring, not that they must play with electricity or the telephone connections, you as the tenant are liable. So you can also take out insurance that should your kid hit the cricket ball through the window, the insurance will pay for that. That's tenant liability insurance because you as a tenant are liable for the damages. Use of credit or debit or SIM cards. Loss or damage due to fraudulent use of a credit, a debit, or SIM cards. An interesting additional cover offered under some personal liability insurance products is that the insurer will compensate the, the insured should he or she be held liable for a loss caused by the fraudulent use of a debit or credit or SIM card. So, should you lose your credit, debit, or SIM card, and before you can stop it, it is been used fraudulently without your permission, you can also get insurance for that, and then they will reimburse you. And members of the immediate family and house case are usually excluded from this cover because they can get access to your credit, debit, or SIM cards. And this is the end of this section of the class 2 and subclass 2.4. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to ask me.